Kia ora, my name's Tim Wilson. I've got a question for you. Would you like 2 million homes in 30 years? Yeah, the National Party, did, then they didn't. What the hell am I talking about? Well, this is the much vaunted U-turn on housing intensification, and we're joined by Thomas Scrimgeour, Maxim Institute researcher. Good to have you with us, Thomas.
Great to be here, Tim.
They're calling it the U-turn, although I don't know how a housing policy can make a U-turn because you're mixing metaphors. What's going on, what happened, and what's at stake here?
So I guess to locate ourselves in this conversation, we're talking primarily about zoning for housing, how much housing is allowed to be built. It's probably not news to any listeners that New Zealand has had an ongoing crisis with the price of housing over the last more than a decade now. Just endless amounts have been written about high house prices in New Zealand. And the main driver for that has been land prices. So the cost to build a house is a challenge, but it's not the main problem. The problem is the cost of the land itself. And the main factor for that is that not enough land has been zoned for more houses to be built on it.
You can only put a certain level, like you can get a two-story, or as my kids say, two-level house. But this new policy suggests you can get 3 to sometimes 15. Was that right?
So if we go back to the previous Labour government, their solution to the housing problem, among other policies, but was their medium density residential standards. And that was reduced, simplistically as 3 stories, 3 dwellings, that on almost all urban land in New Zealand, you'd be allowed to build townhouses with 3 stories, and you could have up to 3 of them. And so that was going to be the way to increase zoned capacity. And National signed on at the time. It was under Judith Collins.
Bipartisan agreement.
Exactly, and that's very, very rare for something so radical. And so we thought we had a consensus on housing policy in New Zealand. Then National gets into power and has a change of heart.
Pumps it up.
Well, they pump it up, but it's a new mechanism that they begin to think about. So instead of mandating 3 dwellings, 3 stories everywhere, in key cities, and particularly Auckland and Christchurch, had a lot of pushback on this. What they said is, okay, you can come up with your own alternative. All you have to do is zone for 30 years growth immediately. So whatever housing you think you might need over the next 30 years, you have to enable that now. And so that was going to push a lot of intensification still, because they needed to be able to build those homes.
Right. And that was that put through? Was it proposed? Or because where are we at here? Because we're talking about the U-turn, which is like, actually Chris Luxon has said, let's go back to the drawing board. We don't need this level of intensification.
So we're sort of in the process at the moment. This is tied up with larger reforms, with the Resource Management Act, which is the rule book for all sorts of things you can do with land and the environment in New Zealand. So not just houses, but mines and factories and everything.
And we will have a 4-hour podcast on that at some point
for the diehard fans. But we're essentially at this stage now where there is consulting going out about especially what Auckland is going to do. How is Auckland going to enable all of...
So this is in advance of the consulting, the submissions, the public hearing. There's already a sense of, hang on, let's just dial this back a bit.
So Auckland has been consulting at the moment. Okay. And then my understanding is that in a whole range of informal settings, local MPs, especially national MPs, are hearing a lot from their constituents that they are not happy with the proposed intensification. And this is primarily coming from the sort of leafy inner suburbs, where they have the classic villas, big trees, wide streets, and residents there are probably the strongest bases for opposition to intensification.
And this is my understanding, is the narrative is that actually national voters decided that they didn't like this policy because it meant that their villas would either be devalued or torn down. So they're pushing back. So National has been captured by the villa owners.
I think there's something to that argument, and it's
a little florid, I'll grant you.
But I think it's really helpful for when we think about the interest groups involved, because often people reduce it to property owners and non-property owners. But there's actually, I think, even if we're being simplistic, we need to divide it into three. There is renters, there is owner-occupiers, and then there is either landlords or developers as a third group. So landlords and developers own property, but they're less likely to oppose deregulating the property market because that is purely a financial asset for them. Whereas owner-occupiers have a whole bunch of other reasons other than financial ones to oppose new development in their area. So we really have three interest groups, and it is those owner-occupiers
who are pushing back the strongest.
Yes, and they're also the most likely to be politically involved. So it's not just they have the strongest opposition to this. Owner-occupiers are far more likely to call an MP, to vote, to join a political party than a renter is.
Then a renter is, yeah. That I think notionally that makes sense. So let's just pull back here, because I think what we're talking about is what makes a home a home. Why is this so important? Because housing is the abiding Kiwi preoccupation.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a lot of the news coverage is very critical of people who oppose new development because we have had such a broken housing market. But it is worth steel manning the position and asking, why do people oppose it? So firstly, a lot of people are concerned about their property value. They have a lot of their financial savings in their house. You pay off a mortgage over many years.
Yeah, that's actually a Kiwi. The financial commentators actually say the way that Kiwis save is by buying houses. If only that money would go into the share market, etc., etc. But we've got what we've got, right?
Absolutely. And so people are often worried about the value of their homes. Now, that's actually perhaps a misguided worry, because what we see when intensification is allowed, where we have what we call upzoning, existing property owners see a windfall gain in the value of their property. And this was shown in 2016 when Auckland passed its unitary plan that upzoned the city. Existing landowners whose land became upzoned saw a windfall gain, even though it put downward pressure on property prices, on dwelling prices, because more dwellings could be built. So there's two effects happening there.
You're able to utilize the property that you have more readily with this new zoning, so the value of your land goes up.
Absolutely. But there is
a percentages, because I'm a numbers guy.
It's highly variable across the entire market. There isn't a consistent one, because if your land isn't upzoned much, or you're already maximizing it, you don't see a lot of gain. And so really dependent on the suburb. But it was really those mid-tier suburbs that saw the biggest gain in value, not the flashiest neighborhoods and not the least valuable neighborhoods. It was really those middle-of-the-road Auckland suburbs.
Okay, so there's the sense that maybe my home might devalue. You're saying actually experience proves that isn't the case when intensification-friendly zoning occurs. What is it that? But I think there's also I wonder if there's a larger issue here, which is community. So my neighbourhood looks like this. I don't want it to look like that. That's why I'm going to go and book an appointment with my local MP.
Absolutely, and I think people tend to buy houses in places they want to live. Shocker. Sometimes with first homes, perhaps less so. People are more financially constrained, but many people, you as much as possible, try and buy in neighborhoods you actually like, and we are resistant to change. And I think it's worth being empathetic to that, because it's the love of home and the love of particular places that actually cause us to invest in community. Where there are radical changes, people might, if they feel a decreasing sense of connection to a place, be less likely to invest in their community. Or if they're more likely to move, when you move, you inevitably lose community ties. Yeah. And when some people start moving, other people do, and stuff is lost. So these radical changes aren't cost-free. I think it's worth being empathetic on that point, that people move into neighborhoods because they love them as they are, and when they change, there are challenges. And the final, I guess, objection is often around infrastructure. People often feel like parking is not going to be available, or their traffic gets worse. And so...
I've got a car in Auckland. I know that there are areas where parking is not available, and it drives me mad. I'm sorry, but I'm going to say that's a completely reasonable objection.
Well, to give one of my more controversial opinions in the world, the problem with unavailable parking is that it hasn't been priced. In any area where parking is priced appropriately, there are parks available. The challenge is that when we densify, people are used to there being free street parking, there's no charge or time limit, and then townhouses start being built without a lot of parking, and so then cars litter the streets permanently, and there are no parks available. And the other sort of challenge is that where Auckland has gone is that we've seen denser development at the edge of the city, out northwest, kind of towards Kumeu-Huapai, and then south towards Drury. And so we have dense suburbs where there's not a lot of street parking, but also people still need a car because they're so far from the centre of the city. If you compare to a classic old world city that has been dense for centuries, what you see is that people can live with either without a car, or more commonly, a family only has one car rather than two, because you're closer to the centre of the city. So where density is matters a lot.
Yeah, and that's, say, the difference between a place like Los Angeles, which is sprawling and not dense, in New York, was that Los Angeles is a car city, no question. Most of the people who live in New York, they take the public transport.
And that's really a feature of history just as much as public policy. LA expanded after the invention of the car. New York expanded before it. So it's not simply that the urban designers in New York were smarter. And this is the same with the Northern Hemisphere. People often get idealistic about those dense old cities. Yeah. They were built before the car.
I've lived there. They weren't smarter.
Exactly right. But so in New Zealand, again, our cities were by and large expanded after the invention of the car, not before. And so I
think we have to take that into consideration when we're considering intensification rules and the availability of parks. But I feel we're getting sidetracked. Is there anything, we've talked about land value, we've talked about sense of community. What else informs why is it as Kiwis that homes are so important to us? And you're across many cultural trends. Surprise us.
Well, I think simply it's to go back to the obvious, that the home is the first place of life. It's where you wake up. It's where you go to sleep. It's where you retreat from the world. To invite someone into your home is a much closer connection than to meet them for coffee. So we heavily invest emotionally in these places because that's what humans do. And then I think for New Zealanders, it's a sense of aspiration, of a kind of independence. Not an independence to ignore all other people, because homes exist within communities.
It's like a refuge, a haven in some ways.
Absolutely. And then it also creates a form of responsibility and care, which gives you both headaches, but then in a sense of satisfaction. When things break in the home you own, it's a pain because you can't just complain to the landlord, but also you have to resolve that. You invest emotionally in the fact that I fixed that thing, or I had to deal with that in a way that's perhaps different. So homeowners, having borne the stress of home ownership, then worry that it's going to be taken away.
Okay. Now we've summarised the U-turn. We've summarised a few reasons why. We've talked about why home is important. Let's get into the for and against these density rules. One critical argument is that the 2 million figure, 2 million dwellings, is excessive and not properly evidenced. True or untrue or middling?
Well, firstly, I think the 2 million homes is a massive comms risk. And so whoever in the pro-housing camp allowed that to be the narrative really missed something. But you're right, people have been arguing that. Well,
actually, parties have struggled with comms risks around housing before. What was the Labour one, where they're going to have 100,000 houses Kiwi built?
Well, yes, but that was sort of a policy challenge as well, is that they promised to build 100,000 homes, and that was sort of under evidence. There wasn't a reason that was the number. But in terms of is zoning for 2 million dwellings under evidence, the question is what evidence would be required? 2 million homes is the sort of minimum allowed, but we don't for any other area of built life or manufactured life create these minimum numbers.
We don't say we need 150,000 factories.
Yeah, there's no minimum number of cars in New Zealand. And we would think it really odd if public policy said, do we have enough evidence, that New Zealand only needs 2 million cars? We simply believe that if we allow cars to be imported into New Zealand, that we will get the right number of cars because people will purchase the cars that they need and want. So
you're opposed to the 2 million number?
Well, no, I think because the 2 million number is a floor, it's not a cap, it's fine, because the challenge has been that councils have refused to zone enough housing. And so if central government is going to put pressure on them, and the mechanism they've chosen is central government direction, 2 million homes as an estimate of 30 years demand is fine. It's just really important to realise that that's not built houses, that is zoned capacity, and it is certain that not all of those houses will be built, because never in any case ever is all zoned capacity used
up. Yeah.
Because we don't actually know where those houses most make sense. We don't know where the next house is going to be financially viable. We don't know where people will desire to live, what jobs will emerge. So you have to zone far more than will actually be used. And developers don't just go building houses for fun. They build houses for money. And they need customers, consumers who are willing to buy.
Yeah, and that will fill that gap. So what you're saying is, look, it's a useful flaw. There's no necessary reason for it, but it's still something.
So the quote-unquote necessary reason is a forecast about 30 years of demand, which is inherently a bit speculative, especially when central government changes immigration policy, which they could radically liberalize or they could radically restrict.
And there's demographics, etc., etc. Yeah. The counter to that in the pro-density case is that capacity is not the same as delivery, which I think you're alluding to, and you need headroom in zoning, or you undershoot actual housing supply. Is that defensible, that you need headroom, otherwise you'll undershoot?
I think it is, and so there are a couple of features of it. The first phrase I'll put out there is competitive urban land markets. So urban land in cities, we want to be competitive. When you restrict the use of land, you basically limit the rights of property owners. And so you could say, oh, wow, that's being harsh on property owners. But actually often it benefits certain existing property owners at the expense of others.
Yeah, well, as you've alluded to with the, will my property devalue?
Exactly. What happens is that land can be used for many things. It could be, you build a shop in it. It could be you build a house in it. It could be you collect a bunch of pieces of land together that are adjacent and develop into something. Or at the edge of the city, it could be a farmland or it could be a suburb. Land can do different things. And central planners don't know what the best use of that land is. This is the classic argument coming out of someone like, say, Friedrich Hayek about where does knowledge lie? What is the best use of this land? And in Wellington, they can't figure that out. It's not that it's hard, it's that it's actually impossible. And so what we need is that...
Okay, I've got a question then. In central Auckland, where council lives and these rules are written, can they figure out what happens in Pukekohe?
Well, exactly right. And this is incredibly local knowledge. And it's not even that then people in Pukekohe generally know what the best use is.
But there's an organic way of dealing with it, which is the market.
Exactly. Those individuals who own the land can use it the way they want to, or they can put it to sale to a range of different people. And those who are willing to pay will be able to determine what's the most valuable use of that land.
Okay. Have we dispensed with the argument about parking?
Well, I guess it's an interesting question.
You want me to pay for my car park, right?
I want you to pay for your car park on your council-owned street,
right?
If there's not enough parking available. Otherwise, you can have a park at your house and pay for a house that has parking.
Right.
It's essentially this curious thing where we assume that all parking everywhere should be free, even though that land has an alternative use. But if people aren't willing to pay, the other option is, and I certainly think we could do more of this, is time limits on parking in residential areas that get busy. We often see these out of shops. You can only park here for 120 minutes or 180 minutes. That way there is always parking available for guests, but that people who live there who want to store a car, you have to store cars on your own property. Because I think that's the problem, is the townhouses where people keep their car on the street permanently.
Well, I wonder, with the townhouses, it's often there's one garage, but two cars. So garage gets used up, and also, let's face it, garages are for storing stuff. And you may be able to squeeze a car in there, but there's also the one out on the street. And
absolutely.
So
and to think about that is a financial subsidy on car ownership. That it is a government subsidy on owning the car because there is land being used up to store it. But people don't tend to talk about it in terms of subsidy.
Is this why you ride a bike 40 k's a day, round trip, coming to work?
Well, I ride a bike because I'm cheap and don't like paying for petrol, and that's my great ideological reason for cycling.
Well, it may even be making you healthier. In terms of the the sense of the argument again, and I think we've touched on it a bit, is the erosion of character. What have we seen overseas in terms of intensification?
In terms of erosion of like community character, social capital.
Yeah.
Essentially what we see is that people can form deep community connections at almost any range of density. When you look at, so the language for this research is often social capital, trying to measure networks or norms and trust. And at really, really high densities, which is to say densities that don't exist in New Zealand, think Hong Kong, think those sort of cities, we do see a decline. But actually, people can form well-connected lives in suburbs. People can form well-connected lives in medium density, sort of inner city townhouse regions. So essentially, I think we should be density agnostic. Community can form in a wide range of places. Where we see radical change in suburbs, that's likely to have transitional effects, but that's really the pressure being released on a long history of restriction. And so you see these rapid changes where it would have been more...
what you're saying is there'd be a period of dislocation, but it would settle down.
Absolutely. And if you have widespread permissible housing allowed to be built, it will always be incremental, and communities can adapt to a lot of different circumstances. But where we see these radical changes in what's allowed, rapid change undermines community cohesion.
One of the because you've written a paper on housing, and one of the things that you raised is a scheme that they have in Dallas, which is because we're talking about the enforcement of zoning from above. You want to tell us a bit more about the sort of elective zoning that's practiced. Was it Dallas? Was that right?
Houston.
Houston.
But you got the right state.
I always get those two mixed up.
So that's I guess a radically different way they handle zoning, which essentially makes it hyper-local. Instead of it being determined by central planners at the state level or even in the city level, they blanket upzoned the city and allowed sort of streets or very, very small neighborhoods to opt out and zone down themselves. But you could also do it the other way, where you allow streets to upzone themselves.
Essentially, and how would they do that? Do they hold some kind of election where you vote, or what is it?
So essentially what you do is you create the blanket policy for the city that says this is what it's going to be unless you opt out, and you require I think it was 2/3 majority of the very small block. If you get the signatures of a 2/3 majority of the homeowners, you could opt out. But crucially, that had a sunset clause for 25 years.
Right.
But really the value...
Could you re-up after 25 years?
You could re-up after 25 years, but again, that would be a different set of homeowners and such. But really what the value of that was that it allowed the most strongly opposed people to opt out, but not to enforce those rules on the entire city.
So no longer do I have to go down and make time to earbash my MP. I'll just sign something and hopefully twist my neighbours to go along with it. And for 25 years, I'm sweet.
Absolutely, because when we think about those are the people most likely to get involved and to lobby for these changes. And in a centralized system, part of the problem is that then they enforce those rules everywhere because they're trying to protect their own patch. If you radically shrink down the patch, then you can say you both contain the problem, and then secondarily, where regions make most sense to develop, those properties will see a gain in value if they allow themselves to develop. So you can go and convince existing streets or existing neighborhoods, your property, we can model, we can even promise, if you're a developer, will go up by $50,000 if you allow us to build. And so those price signals work because people can see the price, and then where people really oppose new dwellings, they don't enforce that on the whole city.
And how's it worked in Houston?
Oh, very, very well. I mean, relative to the rest of the United States, I mean, Texas in general has survived the rising house prices much better than, say, California. It's almost a stereotype now of people fleeing California because of high house prices and moving to Texas.
It's not just the house prices, but
there's crime, there's a range of other things, but housing is a major component because...
And this goes back to the importance of housing in our lives and why we're discussing this.
Absolutely. And also like the value of the prices of them, that they need to be houses that people can afford to buy, because you can't love a house you don't actually get to live in. You can like it, you can view it from afar, but people can learn to love many sorts of houses. We need houses for people to live in.
Okay, bringing it all into land, we're looking at a U-turn in intensification. Where do you think it will land? Where should it land? 2 minutes for your searing hot takes.
So in general, I'm pro allowing housing. I think we need more housing, and most of the
To bring down the cost of entry, the
bring
barriers
down the cost of entry. I think low house prices are a good thing. That there's no argument that houses being expensive as a general improves human well-being. If great houses were cheap, we would all be better off. And I think in general, the arguments against zoning more intensely in Auckland are weak. That the infrastructure problems, where they are real, are solvable. And if you don't allow the houses in the centre of the city, you have to build new infrastructure, which is more expensive. The real question is, and what I'm looking out for, is if National is walking that back a little bit, are they walking back the substance or just the optics?
Right.
Chris Bishop is the most pro housing intensification minister in the government. He's also the one most across the details. He's been involved in housing policy for years at this point and is across the issues. But National is wanting to appease some voters. Are they going to dial back the policy or just symbolically take a few minor steps back but keep the substance? And so I think that'll be an internal argument that we don't yet know where it'll go.
And let's look at Auckland in 30 years' time. What do you see? Okay, let's say, what do you see in the ideal future?
Well, I very want
15-story buildings near train stations and bus interchanges?
Oh, I think certainly there's room for Auckland to have some quite tall buildings, but I think people too quickly rush to what I would call a skyscraper at 15 stories. New Yorkers would probably laugh at me for that. But really it's
a townhouse in New York.
What we're talking about is the missing middle of houses. On the corners of busy interchanges, these 6-story apartment blocks, which are big for a New Zealand standpoint, but tiny for a big city. And then those proper row houses you see in older parts of the world. Now, partly there's a range of zoning reasons. Those are hard to build in New Zealand. But neighborhoods that are built around density and then allowing the spread of the city so that single-family dwelling suburbs still exist, but not so close to the city centre, because it's a strange type of urban design where we see standalone villas near the city centre and then row houses at the edge of the city. So what I would like to see is
back to front and so
Auckland to fill the hole in the donut with more dense housing and then allowed to be spread out with what we'd call suburbia at the edges of the city, because that's a great way to live as well.
So fill the donut and put more sugar on the outside.
That's great. We'll put you in the slogan making department.
Thomas, thank you.
Thanks for having me, Tim.